and so I was really I was asking myself, well, what is the opposite of alienation, right? Or what is the nature of alienation? Probably we have to start there. And I think burnout is a state of alienation. And actually doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists would totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find this interesting because they have a lot of interest.
Because you meet with psychologists and psychiatrists in Germany.
Yeah, and we have also joint projects, and I meet with them a lot, and I find it interesting. Sociologists are always a bit skeptical. When you mention burnout, they say, oh, it's a diagnostic artifact.
That's not sociological.
Yes, exactly.
Enough.
And it's too individualistic or so. Yeah. But psychologists and psychiatrists, they actually agree that there's even some new form of pathology, right? And it really has the form that, I mean, when you are in depression or in burnout, then you experience the world as something that is totally disconnected from you, right? I mean, people in burnout say, well, I do have, for example, a lot of the AAA, a lot of things available, attainable and accessible. I have a lot of money and a great house and a good job, maybe. But it doesn't mean anything. I don't feel touched by it, right? It's like the world is frozen. It's silent, grey and cold. And inside me, I feel the same. I actually don't feel myself anymore. I can't hear myself, right? I'm frozen. I'm dead. So I really looked into this and thought, well, what's missing? The problem is, and I call this the problem of alienation, the connection. There is no vibrant thread between my inside and the outside, right? That's the problem. So I was looking for the opposite of this. How would you describe a state of being or a state of experience which is not alienated? And this is how I arrived at my idea of resonance, right? And that means you're not alienated if you, and that's the appropriation you were asking for, right? For example, you could actually, music is a great example, right? I mean, sometimes, I think many people know this, right? Maybe you have Spotify or other forms of streaming services, and there you have 9 million of titles or so, and you surf through them, and you think, yeah, this is quite cool, but it doesn't speak to you, it doesn't touch, right? That's good, yeah. I really think there might actually be an inverse relationship. The more there is out there, the more they all look the same somehow, right? Yeah. But what are we after when we think of real experiences with music, for example? We all know there's other forms of listening when you feel you really connect, and that means something touches you. I describe this as affection, right? Something is affecting me. It's breaking my armor almost of what's the word? And then you see it, for example, you see it in that our eyes change, right? The eyes brighten up or they beam, right? And sometimes you might have tears in your eyes, which is just a sign something touched me. It's affection. But this is not enough, right? When you have an experience of that sort, you try to answer it. That's the term emotion is quite good for this because it comes from emovere, moving outwards. It's the movement outwards. So you open up to the thing that touches you, right? And then you reach out and you also reach the other side in dialogue, for example, right? We listen and we answer. Exactly. I'm touched and I try to answer and then I reach out. And it's the same with music because you start to appropriate in an active way. You might actually clap your hands or so, go along with the rhythm. Or when the music stops, you hear how it continues to sing inside you, right? You sing. So you see, we answer it, and thereby we feel self-efficacy, right? I feel alive, as Latour would say. I think he's great there. He says, these are the moments where we feel alive, being called by something. Something is calling me. Can be music, can be an idea, can be a person you talk to, a child in the street, whatever. Or landscape, it's nature. Calling you, exactly. And then you answer it, and then you connect in a particular way which transforms you, because people would say after experiences of resonance, I wasn't the same anymore, right? It might be kind of on a micro level. For example, I felt very bad, and then I heard this music, and I wasn't the same, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But sometimes it's very deep, that you would say, after this encounter or this experience, I was a different person, what people often say. So this is the third element in my theory of resonance. The first is affection. The second is self-efficacy. You reach out, emotion. The third is transformation. You don't stay the same. But at the interesting point, and this is where my diagnosis of modernity, I think, has its kind of point of culmination, if you so like. These moments of resonance are those moments where we actually, what we are looking for, what we are hoping for, to be in resonance with the world, right? Being capable of being touched in self-efficacy. And this is actually how Marx describes work, right? He says, I mean, it's while you work on something, you feel self-efficacious, right?
Yeah.
but you shape the outside, and thereby you also shape the inside, right?
It's a romantic, expressivist conception behind work, at least as Charles Taylor would have it.
I mean, it is expressive, I agree, right? But it also has these other elements. I mean, the expressive side is the kind of the reaching out, the emotion or the self-efficacy, but it's also that it means something to you. You experience it as meaningful. And that you transform both sides. Right? So it's not just... I've turned a bit away from identity theory, right? It's it's not only expressive of me, but while I work on it, for example, while I write the book on resonance, right, I become a different person, so I change, right, in a certain way. But the thing is that you cannot control this in two ways. One is you cannot ensure that you will get in resonance with a piece of work or with the music, right? I mean, we might play our favorite music and nothing happens.
Nothing happens.
Actually, sometimes you wonder, however, you could see something in this music.
Particularly when you force the experience, no?
And that's
I want to get this from this, and you don't get it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, when you say, "Oh, I'm in a bad mood, I have to play my favorite music," then you can be pretty sure it doesn't happen. And also, when the expectations are too high, right? You pay a lot of money to see your favorite star or your best concert. It's very likely that nothing happens. Yeah. You might try to convince yourself afterwards.
One can see the point perfectly well from what you have exposed before, because if capitalism and modern society is based on a logic of strategic action, to break through, you need an experience that cannot be induced through strategic purposes.
That's the point.
That appears or
that's exactly the point, and that's why I think the modern logic of the logic of optimization, right, and of increase, but also the logic of making things available at the point, control them completely, is against this moment of uninsurability, or however you call it, unpredictability, I would call it, right? But it also has another side, namely when resonance happens with whatever it is, for example in dialogue, it's impossible to know in advance or to predict what the transformation will be. Right? I mean, if you have a strong experience with nature, with another person, or with music, you can kind of predict that it will change you because that's the nature of resonance, but you cannot predict in what way it changes you. And there you see, I would really say, these moments of being touched by something which you cannot control, which is something different. Right? I mean, it says difference is very important. That's why I think I've now moved beyond identity thinking, right? The idea is I encounter something which is different and it speaks to me and it's got something to tell me and I allow myself to be touched and transformed by it. This is something that actually has become too risky in our late modern world. You know, we stand on these downward slopes. We have to run up like mad. We cannot allow ourselves to be touched by something where you don't know what the outcome is. You don't know whether something happens and in which direction it transforms you. I mean, that's why time is important here, because when you're short on time, you have to go to the airport because your plane leaves. You may not get in resonance with anything. It's way too risky, right? And being in resonance, in a disposition towards resonance, means making yourself vulnerable, right? And I think we don't allow ourselves, for good reasons, to be vulnerable in this sense, and this creates alienation and frustration.
Absolutely. Actually, one could be reasonable, skeptical about the possibility of a cultural change, right, from our state of affairs, because actually we're competing all the time with each other, because there is no alternative in a certain way. So actually, we would need to break out of this logic in order to give ourselves the time to experience a type of experience which is different, qualitatively different, right?
I agree.
But I find very interesting, that I'm very interested, for example, in what the consequences of this resonance conception could have for politics or for the way we are treating each other in the public sphere. We're talking to each other because, and we were talking about this the other day, most of politics today is about conflict. Especially in the left, right? There is a conception that politics is about struggle, conflict, hegemony, you could even say, and that there's no way out of that.
That's good.
But I know that maybe if you could elaborate a little bit more, or how could politics, for example, be dealt in a different way from this conception? of resonance.
Yeah, I really think it does have direct political ramifications or consequences. But it's important for me to see that this resonance idea is not a kind of luxury, right? When all the basic needs are met and you already have a luxurious life, then you can care a little for resonance also. Right? I really believe it's on the one hand, I mean, human beings are kind of, I mean, we only form through processes of resonance. When you look at babies, how they interact with mothers or fathers, right, significant others. So I think we always already have knowledge of these moments of resonance. We do have these experiences, and that's why I think it's a tool that we can use to transform society, also politically. But it is important, and this is something I take from the first generation of critical theorists, to keep alive this sense, this idea of a different way of being in the world, of a different mode of being in the world. I mean, for me, this is what Adorno and Marcuse tried to say all the time, and it was their greatest worry. I mean, they said something is wrong with the whole way we approach the world, we live our lives, right? And it's wrong on the most basic level, not just in the ways setting up institutions in the wrong way or producing the wrong goods or so, but in the very way we approach the world, right? I mean, for example, Marcuse had this idea in Eros and Society. It's quite interesting that they call it Eros and Society in the English world. I mean, the title.
Yeah.
Because he says this modern attitude is kind of Promethean, right? Promethean, and that's the idea that you need to control and shape and increase and so on. And against this, he had the idea of somehow in a kind of erotic relationship with the world as such, with work and with the nature and so on. And you find something similar in Adorno, where he has this very vague ideas of a mimetic way of being in the world instead of instrumental control and instrumental reason. And they had this great anxiety that we lose the awareness, the idea that there is this possibility. So I was really motivated to come up with resonance theory by the idea that we have to give this a name, that we have an idea, a kind of, it's like a compass which we can use on how to shape our institutions, right? So resonance does not provide you with a complete set of institutions or a kind of blueprint for a resonant world, but with an idea of what it could be to be in a resonant mode. And when you really turn to democratic politics, I found this really interesting, because I think democracy actually lives from a promise, from multiple promises of resonance. I mean, when you start at a basic level, it's quite interesting. It's something you also get from Charles Taylor. He says in former times there was something, he quotes Lovejoy, the great chain of being. Human beings had the idea that they are part of a kind of a coherent order, maybe of God's creation, where you had a certain place and a role to fulfill.
Hierarchical.
Yes, hierarchical, but then you feel connected to the whole.
Yeah.
Right? The world outside the whole is part of divine creation.
And you have your place in it.
Yes, exactly. In one sense, that's great, right? I mean, there are other senses where it's not so great. But even if you don't go for a kind of Christian image, you might have the idea that there's a kind of natural order of which you are a part. But for us moderns, the historical world is contingent. I think Foucault is quite right? Yeah. I mean, it's the outcome of myriads of historical struggles and contingencies and accidents and power relations, right? So actually, the social world you live in, and we all live in, is I'm not connected to me. It's a contingent world which is kind of limiting me and oppressing me in many ways. And now the only way to reappropriate the world, to have a kind of resonant connection with this world, is democracy. Because democracy, in my view, gives you the idea, now the promise, I believe this is why democracy has become such a powerful idea. Democracy is the power that you are given a voice, which you can make heard, right? You can speak it out. And so democracy is the sense that those institutions you live in are not just even repulsive or indifferent institutions which are just out there, cold and indifferent or hostile, right? But you can reach out and connect with them. And then it's the expressive idea with Taylor, but I think it's not just expression. The idea is those institutions, the government and so on, right? They actually hear me and see me and they answer me. So I feel self-efficacy. I am partially shaping the world, and the world is answering to me. So democracy is this promise. It's exactly a promise of resonance. I can make my voice heard, but I also I'm touched and reached by those institutions, and therefore we permanently transform the world. We reshape it. Right? Democracy is an ongoing process, and it also gives us a certain sense on the political process, and this for me is very important. I think this is what you're trying to get at. Namely, I mean, the idea is that in a democratic society, you do have a voice, but you also have ears, and you need the ears, right? Because the voice does not make sense without ears. Yeah. And that means I am capable of articulating my position and giving my voice. And I hear others, I encounter others with a different position, with different interests, very important, right? Yeah. And so they speak differently, they think differently, they have another position. And now the process, there needs to be a process of resonance. I hear them, I feel touched by them because they are my fellow citizens, but I also answer them. I speak in my own voice. And then we enter into a kind of dialogue which transforms us, which transforms all of us. And thereby we are transformed in a way which makes it possible to come out with a collective shaping of something like the common good. And the problem now, I really believe this process of politics only works if you think at the heart of politics is not struggle and conflict and fight, but the idea of a collective shaping of society. For this you need something like the idea of a common good. Right? I agree. Yeah. But I believe that in political theory as well as in political practice, we have forgotten this. Yeah. The idea is that you encounter enemies which you have to conquer and actually to silence them. Yeah. I mean, you really see it on all levels. I mean, you see it on the level of how political debates are done, right? You see it on talk shows, where, of course, if we were a talk show, I certainly should not be touched by what you say, right? I mean, you really see what I mean?
Hard talk.
Yes, the world turns into a field of points of aggression. I wait for you to make a slight mistake and then I kill you, right? It's a rhetorical struggle.
You're not listening. And
certainly if I'm a politician and I move through discussion, at the end I say, yeah, I think you were right. I'm done, right? And it's the same in parliamentary debate. Yeah. Don't be touched or moved by the others. Don't change in a collective process, but insist on pushing through your interests. And then this continues on the streets, where you have demonstrations. You want your voice to be heard, which I think is a good thing, but you certainly don't want to hear the others. Yeah. You want them to silence and to be shut up, right? And I think this is bad. And what I find about most frustrating is that leftist political theory has completely taken up on this, with people like Chantal Mouffe and
Laclau. That's right.
But many others. The idea is it's a kind of the heart of politics is conflict, is struggle, and it's a very cynical idea about the common good, because the idea is that you claim that your interests are in the common good. You use the idea of a common good strategically to push through your own interests. I think it's an incoherent and very bad idea, which kills this promise of a resonant public sphere. Which is, by the way, I mean, my resonance conception of democracy is a Republican conception of democracy.
That's what I want to say. Yeah, close to Hannah Arendt.
Yes.
In that sense.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. Do you think that the political movements we are witnessing in the world, like the nationalist conservative movements, like in Brazil, for example, Bolsonaro now, which is very high in the polls, or the identity politics of the left, sexual identities, ethnic identity, do you see these as expressions of the world in which we live in, according to your interpretation of it?
Yeah, definitely. I really think you can, almost on a worldwide scale, I would really say so, because I believe you can see processes in China, in Turkey, and Russia, which have similar forms, certainly in Latin America, in the US, and in Europe, which are clear expressions of political frustrations, which are manifestations of alienation, right? People have the feeling, the strong feeling or the experience that they are not heard, that they are not seen, right? Are not addressed, right? And that they are not self-efficacious in shaping societies. They feel they are not the subjects of shaping society, which is actually true, because you could say it's capital, but I would say it's the logic of dynamic stabilization, which is the real subject, as Marx says, right? The subject is not human beings; it's not even a class. It's the logic of
the forces that work behind the backs of the agents.
And I call it the iron cage of dynamic stabilization is shaping our lives, right? So I think there are good reasons to feel that the politics even in the democratic politics we're having, is not living up to its promise of a resonant shaping of our world, right? It's not giving us the voice it promised. But now I think the solutions that you find in identity politics as well as in this right-wing populism, as I would call it, or populism, is badly mistaken, really, because interestingly, it's very often about, I say resonance starts with listening to or hearing some other speak to you as a meaningful voice, right? I mean, that's the idea of citizens. The other says something different from what I think, but it might be meaningful. And normally, most populists, at least, one would have to rethink it about identity politics, right? But let's start with the populists. They don't want any other voices. Right? I mean, the idea is, for example, when you look at the German debate or at the US debate, we can maybe take the US debate because it's well known. The idea is, shut up all the other voices. We don't want Muslims here. We don't want Mexican or other immigrants here, right? We don't want to listen to Wall Street. We don't want to listen to the establishment. Shut up the press and shut up the intellectuals, right? The idea is, we don't want to hear any other voice except this one voice, right? Which then maybe is Trump. And I find this most telling. I mean, I find it great because Trump, in his acceptance speech at the Republican convention in 2016, I think, I quite liked that. I thought, this is the only thing of Trump I heard which I find almost touching, right? he reached out and said, you who are forgotten in the Rust Belt, you who no one hears in, I don't know, Detroit or elsewhere, right? I am your voice. And I thought, this is great, right? Because it is exactly what I say, right? It's the idea that you are given a voice. But the thing is, of course, he does not say, I give you your voice. He says, I am your voice. And that means, of course, it's not a resonant conception of politics, because it's not only that we don't want to hear anyone who says something different. It's also that we don't hear our own voices. Our own voices are fused in the voice of the leader, be it Bolsonaro or Trump or someone else, right? He speaks for us. Yeah. And that's certainly not resonance. That's the total opposite, right? I mean, you do not get experiences or forms of resonant politics in this way. You neither hear the others, nor do you hear yourself. It's the idea of you have a fusion in this one voice of the leader, which is actually probably the worst form of alienation we can suffer. So I think the political frustration has explainable origins which are justified. It's alienation. But so far we see only bad solutions, and I believe a bit that on the left, right, we are kind of also a bit guilty for this, because we conceptualize politics always about struggle. And conflict.
I wanted to start wrapping up, but I have a couple of questions that I wanted to make you. For example, if I hear you talk about resonance, right? And in a way, I think that this is a cultural change that you are talking about ultimately. Yeah. So I thought about education and how schools and educators and teachers are facing their task. And in all around the world, people want the children to learn math and to learn how to write and read very early. And that's kind of an ideal that has imposed lately. Yeah. But this I see as an acceleration process in the classroom. I mean, the earlier I learn certain skills, the better I will fit probably in the marketplace, etc. What do you think about this current process in education, and what hope do you see for these new perspectives in the classroom?
Yeah, I think education is a great field to see what kind of the difference I'd like to make, right? And there I think you can see how the idea of resonance, I hope at least, can make a political difference, really. Yeah. Because it's exactly as you say. I mean, the current ideas of education is, of course, you have to start very early and to do everything you can. Particularly the middle classes are always totally afraid that their kids might lose out, might somehow stay behind, right? Yeah. I mean, the cultural frustrations comes from the perception that now we have to do everything we can in order for our kids not to deteriorate, not to lose what we have, right? It's very frustrating. And in order to get there, the idea is we have to optimize them, and particularly they have to acquire competencies, skills, right? It's skills, basically.
Skills, right? Competencies, the same words.
Yeah. It's the idea of teaching skills, and skills are actually the tools with which you make the world available, attainable, accessible, right? It's the
exactly.
AAA approach.
It's the same logic.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and therefore, of course, you can create a completely silent universe or a silent self-world relationship.
Yeah.
And I think what formation really is about, and almost all teachers know it all over the world, right? Is that you somehow manage to create a connection between the child or the student and a certain segment of the world, right? You open up the world in a way which makes the other side speak. For example, let's say you have a history class, right? A history lesson. Normally, most kids would say, "Oh, history is boring; it's dead, right? I rather want to do the computer game." It's obvious, right? And you make a successful moment of education or formation, as the Germans would have Bildung. Yeah.
That's a nice word.
Yeah, it's not to acquire a competency, like a set of data about history or so, right? A form of skills. It's when all of a sudden history starts to speak to you. It teaches you something. You realize, oh, that was a different period or an interesting period. It has something to do with my own life. Right? It's the same when you have a literature class, right? Or so, right? For example, when a poem, you can have skills in interpreting a poem. You have to decide on what metrum and the rhetorics and the topoi and so on. But formation education starts when all of a sudden this poem or this novel or whatever it is speaks to you. You hear a different voice that might have something to tell you. And it's the same even in the natural sciences. You might do astronomy. I mean, astronomy where most kids don't know anything about it. You know, I'm a fan of astronomer.
I know,
right? And I know this moment when I, for example, watched the stars and someone explained to me that this is a different galaxy, the Andromeda galaxy, and the light was sent out 2 million years ago. And you see probably about 100 billion stars in this one field of sight, right? And then all of a sudden this touched me. It was exactly a moment of resonance, right? The universe started to speak to me in this metaphorical sense. So I think you can really go through all the classes you can have, right? I mean, it's the same in sociology, which I teach, right? It's not about. Students always ask me at the end of class, well, do I have to know this in order to pass the test? Well, that's skills, right?
Absolutely.
But I want Marx and Weber to speak to them, right? And the thing is, it's not that they have to accept it or to agree with it, but they hear a voice which has something interesting to tell them. That's education. And I think we have to rethink the educational process.
We have to. These lines. Absolutely. I wanted to close with this, since you just mentioned Weber. You know, this famous talk that he gave in 1917, I think. Science as vocation. And he says that science cannot answer the deepest questions we humans have. What shall we do in life? What's the good life, maybe? And you seem to cut with that Weberian tradition, but you have something to say as a sociologist.
Well, that's interesting.
I'll give you the last word now to...
Yeah, well, it is quite difficult. Actually, I haven't thought about this, because, I mean, science as a vocation is one of my absolutely most favorite
It's an absolutely interesting text,
I think, you know, when you ask me how did you become a social scientist, I would say it was with science as a vocation, and it was particularly with the closing lines, right? And I think he was so true. I mean, he quotes Tolstoy there.
Tolstoy.
He says, yes, as human beings, we have this desire, or we need an answer to what should I do with my life, right? What's the point of it? Yes, he says science cannot give the answer. And I would actually Weber had this idea that, but we can say something, right? I mean, you have to find your demon, he says, but I can. But I can tell you what the consequences are, right? What you will get out of a certain. That's Weber's idea, but I think you're actually right. I break a bit with him.
I think you are, because it's always very clear in saying that teachers, professors should not talk about these issues in the classroom.
Yes, I think yes and no. But the thing is that on the one hand, I would say I'm true to Weber, because resonance is a kind of formal conception, right? I don't tell you have to listen to Pink Floyd or to Mozart.
I know.
I don't even tell you
to each person.
I don't have to. I don't tell you that Catholic religion is better than Protestant or Hinduistic or anything else. So what the contents of resonance is, I don't say, right? Actually, I think I'm totally true to Weber. Yes, I believe, because I mean what he says. You have to find the demon who holds your strings in hand, right? This is what I mean. You have to find your axis of resonance. What is your life an answer to? What is the question that you try to answer? But I would say it's not one question, right? It's a set of and of realities out there in the world to which you relate your life. Of course, I come up with a kind of relational ontology. So I do agree. I mean, there are differences, but I think Weber had a kind of similar idea, right? That you cannot tell where you find your resonance, maybe not even where to look for. But this is what gives meaning to your life and gives the point and purpose, opening up axis of resonance. That's different from acquiring more and more a greater horizon of the available and accessible.
That's interesting. You should write more about that.
It's an interesting suggestion. I should write at least an article.
And I thank you very much for this conversation, that you are in Chile, that you gave all these talks this week. So
I liked it very much, I have to say. So
very good. Thank you.